Awesome. I think we've got people attending and we're going to get started. Welcome again to the Get There by Bike webinar as part of the Your New Commute campaign. We appreciate you giving up your lunch hour today to learn a little bit about some of the cycling projects that we have coming up in the city and how to get around by bike, some commute planning resources. My name is Siobhan Witherby. I'm an active transportation planner with HRM. I'm joined by my colleague Chloe Kennedy, who's also an active transportation planner, and we'll be guiding you through this webinar today. Next slide, please. Before we get started, we're going to do a little bit of housekeeping on how to use Microsoft Teams. There is closed captioning available should you wish to use it, but you have to turn it on yourself. So you can see in the image there is a small CC button at the very bottom of the page. You can click that to toggle it on and off, and there might be a slight delay before the captioning begins. We will note that this session is being recorded and it will become part of the public record. We're going to post it back onto YouTube and the Shreveport City website for future reference. So with that being said, the Q&A session will all be part of that public record, and if you don't wish to be part of that, you can click the leave button at the top of the window if you are ready to leave at any time during the session. On the right-hand side, we have a bar that is our Q&A area. So you can post questions at any point during the meeting and they will collect in our chat bar. We will answer them at a designated question period at the end, but if anything comes to you while we're talking, please write it into the chat bar and we'll address it towards the end of the presentation. When you do click that, there is an option to provide your name. This is optional. If you do want your first and last name on the public record, please write that in there. But if you do not want your name, feel free to write a nickname or just your first name. You're also able to post anonymously if you leave it blank. And then below that, in the next area down is where you type in your question. Perfect. In the box that says ask a question. Great, so I believe that's all the housekeeping items. I'll take you through our agenda. I'm going to do a brief introduction to active transportation planning in Halifax and a policy overview for you before we launch into two projects that are on the go right now, the Dahlia Oak Creighton Active Transportation Connections Project and the Dartmouth North Bikeway project. Next, we're going to take you through a route planning exercise, how to navigate HRM's new bikeways and choose your route if you're getting to and from work or to and from your destinations. We'll help you with that. And then collecting the questions and discussion period for the end. Fantastic. So the largest question, why is active transportation important? So we invest as a municipality in active transportation for environmental sustainability reasons, for equity reasons, and working towards a healthy and vibrant community. So investing in active transportation infrastructure allows people to feel safe when they're choosing walking and cycling, and potentially replacing those transportation trips, shifting away from single occupancy vehicles. In turn, that reduces our greenhouse gas emissions and the number of vehicles on our roads, which is kind of promoting environmental sustainability. An important equity piece is that not everyone can afford to own or drive a vehicle. So it's important to provide a range of transportation options that are more affordable and accessible, that make sure that people can get safely to where they need to go around the city. Lastly, the health benefits of active transportation. You can kill two birds with one stone. If you're combining exercise with transportation, you can get that exercise while you're getting from A to B, which contributes to kind of cardiovascular health, helping to fight against some of our issues with obesity, and overall kind of mental health. It's quite fun and liberating and good psychologically for you to use AT to get around the city. And then lastly, AT infrastructure helps to encourage vibrant communities. So Streets with good walking and cycling infrastructure encourage people to linger, contributes to that great street life and sense of place that we're looking for. We're looking to build at HRM. So a bit of policy context. One of our largest guiding documents is the Integrated Mobility Plan, which outlines how we move people and goods in the city. It supports the increase of the number of people walking and cycling and transit in the city and how all of those networks fit together. So the IMP vision is to provide a connected, healthy, affordable, and sustainable transportation network with options for people moving around and integrating that with land use planning of where we're densifying and how we develop as a municipality. So one of the largest implications of that from an AT perspective that we refer to often in our group is this regional center all ages and abilities bikeway network map. And you can see there on the screen, it prioritizes where the city should be building up this infrastructure to allow people to get to and from their destinations on a connected all ages and abilities network. You can see there's 3 different colors there making up the AAA network. So we have the orange color, which is protected bikeways, the blue color, which is local street bikeways, and the green color, which is multi-use pathways. I'll talk a little bit more about those in a moment, but all 3 of those facility types contribute to our connected network. And as active transportation planners at the city, we're working to build this out. So the process that it usually works for building out this active transportation infrastructure, we're using the regional plan, the integrated mobility plan, as our kind of driving policy. Chloe and I work in the first stage, which is functional planning. It's taking kind of those lines on a map that we saw in the regional center AAA bikeway network and taking it from 0 to 30% design, proof of concept. Got the orange arrow because that's where we do most of our work. From there, it has to be approved by council. Then it goes through the process of preliminary and detailed design, construction, and then we will continue to monitor it after the fact. We're going to focus on functional planning today. So diving again into what is functional planning, through this process, we do a lot of public engagement and evaluation of route options. We're always collecting public and stakeholder input to balance the trade-offs and identify what type of walking and cycling facilities are the best to achieve the goals of the project. And we will use that to inform these 30% designs for the preferred facility. I said proof of concept, that's presented to council. So our typical process for functional planning is looking at all of the existing conditions on the street and in the area. We'll do a few rounds of public and stakeholder engagement, develop some route options and designs for what the street could look like, run it through another round of public and stakeholder engagement, and use that to select our preferred design option. Each project is a little bit context specific, but this is a good sort of idea of how it works. Yeah, we'll shape that into the 30% design and take it to council. We've mentioned all ages and abilities, this acronym of AAA, and I think it's important in this presentation to talk about who are we designing for and what that means. So the classic AAA, all ages and abilities, means from 8 to 80. We're designing for people who are out there on the roads already, who feel quite confident cycling along our streets, but we're also focusing on building infrastructure for those who might be a little bit more tentative, who don't currently cycle but are interested in potentially trying to bicycle for transportation purposes if they have connected and safe infrastructure. So the key goal for us is providing that infrastructure that entices new people to take cycling trips for transportation purposes. There's a range of facilities that are acceptable for people's comfort levels in terms of designing all ages and abilities facility. The least suitable are streets without any active transportation infrastructure, no cycling lanes, Then we have the sort of sharrows or on-road painted bike lanes without any buffers. Those may or may not be suitable for all ages and abilities. But on the right half of that spectrum, where we start getting into our AAA infrastructure, is where you can have separated facilities from vehicles. We've got or traffic calmed local corridors that are comfortable for people cycling. So we have local street bikeways, protected bike lanes, and also off-street pathways. In HRM, we refer to these as multi-use pathways. So depending on your comfort level, those would be slightly better for people who are nervous about taking cycling trips, and what we're focusing on for infrastructure investment in Halifax right now. In terms of the types of protected bike lanes that we're building in Halifax right now, our goal obviously is the permanent bike lanes. Some examples that we have are the beautiful raised bike lanes on South Park Street. On the far right, we also have some tactical, temporary, and interim bike lanes that will help us to get there, but the street's not quite ready yet for recapitalization. So on the left, the tactical temporary bike lanes. An example of that is Rainy and Gottingen, where we recently installed bike lanes with bollards and paint, and those are the most temporary and movable if we need to make changes, but it allows us to test and try and monitor and start moving towards planning that permanent facility. In the middle is this interim treatment, which is going to be in place for a few years. An example of that is the bike lanes that were installed on Hollis Street. This uses bollards and paint, but also a slightly more permanent concrete curb that helps to define that protection between the bicycles and the vehicles. In terms of local street bikeways, these are traffic calmed corridors where the bicycles and the vehicles can travel along safely single file. We're focusing on low and slow volume and treatments to help cross at major intersections. We have a few examples of these in the city. For example, the Vernon Seymour Local Street Bikeway Corridor and the Allen Oak Local Street Bikeway Corridor, and they serve sometimes as alternative routes to where there may be more vehicles traveling along the busier corridors. Some folks may feel more comfortable traveling on a local street, a designated local street corridor, instead of a protected bike lane. And then the last piece is these multi-use pathways, also known as trails or greenways. So these are completely off-street, sometimes seen as the most comfortable type of facility, but the space is shared between bicycles and pedestrians, as well as people rolling and wheeling and scooting and skating. So you can do just about any active use on these trails. There are thresholds where we're beginning to see these multi-use pathways being quite popular, and we could consider separating out the uses of pedestrians and bicyclists, but in some situations they are still the most appropriate. A lot of the time it's bringing people in to the urban core, the center, from areas outside of the city. Some areas that I can think of are the Dartmouth Harbourfront Greenway or the Chain of Lakes Greenway, Chain of Lakes Trail. That would be good examples of these multi-use pathways in Halifax. So these are the AAA bicycling network routes that we are working towards building. That's kind of the network that has been approved in the Integrated Mobility Plan. And then as you can see, the colors have changed here, and this is how we're working towards building this out. So the darkest green color is what has already been constructed, and everything in that kind of lighter green color is what is currently in functional planning right now, where we're working towards, there's actual kind of movement towards building out those routes. And our eventual goal in the next few years is to have this complete AAA cycling network. So that is awesome, and that's what Chloe and I are working towards. Next, I'm going to talk about the first project, that I've been involved with. Myself and my colleague Phil Nickerson have been working on the Dahlia Oak Creighton Active Transportation Connections project. So the purpose of this project is to improve the walking and cycling connections between the Dartmouth Common and the Shubenacadie Canal Greenway at Sullivan's Pond. So we had some routing questions associated with this. Where do people want to move through the neighborhood? What's the best route to connect? We were comparing Tulip Street to Dahlia Street. We were also trying to select an appropriate cycling facility. Where Dahlia is a local road, we wanted to confirm if a local street bikeway was the most appropriate, or if we needed to look at protecting a bikeway on Dahlia Street, or any other combination of factors. We also, through this project, we're identifying areas where pedestrian improvements were needed or could be incorporated, and crossing improvements where it does cross many major streets. So you'll probably be familiar with this map. The origin of this is the Integrated Mobility Plan. It's this small but important segment that connects people from the whole Shubenacadie Canal Greenway down into the core of downtown Dartmouth, as well as across the bridge and over into Halifax. So it is a key link, and it's also part of the Blue Route and the Great Trail. So there are kind of even larger provincial implications to making sure that this connection is suitable for all ages and abilities. It is a challenging corridor to try and plan, a challenging area. Within the flower streets of Dartmouth, there are some fairly steep hills. Both the cross streets and the connector streets are quite steep, so you're dealing with grade and trying to find a route that is the most accessible out of ones that are, I think, 5 to 8% plus. So figuring out how the best way to get people up those hills would be. The sight lines at intersections are challenging, where some of the older homes are located right on the sidewalk or quite close to the intersection, and it sometimes blocks the view. There are some complicated intersection alignments in the way that the streets come together, particularly around Dahlia and Creighton and Dahlia and Oak. So figuring out what some of those alignments could be improved is part of the project. It crosses 3 major streets at Victoria Road, Maple Street, and Creighton Avenue, and how to get people across there safely. There are some old retaining walls you can see in this picture at the intersection of Creighton and Dahlia. We kind of have, because of the slopes of the road, there have been some retaining walls to provide continuous sidewalk there, but it's not always accessible for people who want to cross into the park or cross onto Creighton. So resolving some of those issues, and obviously focusing on protecting all of the mature street trees and green space as much as possible. We hosted 2 rounds of public engagement in August and October of 2020. This was kind of in the middle of our COVID, so we had to host both of these engagements entirely virtually. So through that, we did some webinar Q&A sessions, as well as 2 online surveys, and engaged over 650 participants between those 2 sessions, which is fantastic. We also engaged with some of the stakeholders in the area, for example, walking and cycling advocacy groups, the Downtown Dartmouth Business Commission, the Dartmouth Horticultural Society, and nearby schools and paddling clubs to get their perspective on the routes and how to improve them. And then all of this was subject to review by an internal technical committee at HRM, involving folks in kind of our traffic and operations and parks departments to make sure that everything aligned and we could continue to provide service and operate our roads safely. So through this engagement process and review, we came up with a design solution to create this all ages and abilities walking and cycling corridor, and that was in the form of a local street bikeway. On Dahlia, the traffic volumes are already quite conducive to a local street bikeway treatment. I believe there were under 600 vehicles per day that were currently using Dahlia, so we were within a comfortable lane sharing threshold. already based on that. So the 42 km/h speeds were a little bit high for a shared single file roadway, and that's where we wanted to focus our efforts. So the peak hour turn restrictions off of Maple onto Dahlia were to remain in place. Those have been there for 10, 15 plus years, but our major addition was adding, or will be, to add speed tables along the corridor to get that speed as low as possible, as close to 30, 35 km/h as possible, and keep things moving slowly in single file along that area. One thing about the speed tables is that they can't be located on a hill, so they're mostly on the flat parts of Dahlia before you get to Beach Street. Another major addition to promote this local street bikeway is signage and pavement markings. You can see in that upper photo, we've got the green backed sharrow in the center of the lane that kind of notifies people that this is a cycling priority corridor. It helps with the placement of the bikes in the lane, and kind of helps with the single file flow along the bikeway. A major addition is intersection improvements to help people get across Victoria, Maple, and Creighton. So in this design, we have incorporated the addition of curb extensions or intersection bulb outs to kind of narrow the crossing distance and improve visibility at the intersections. At Victoria, Maple, and Creighton, there will be rectangular rapid flashing beacons, RRFBs, as you can see in that photo above, the little yellow strip that will be added. So there has been an existing RRFB at Maple, but we'll add a new one at Victoria and at Creighton. And we will have cross rides so that you can continue to ride on your bicycle across the corridor while still getting that priority. Before we move forward, I will note that we're waiting on some legislation changes from the province about bicycles being able to activate these RRFB flashing beacons. So this year, our plan is just to install the pedestrian push button elements, but our hope is with the new changes to the Traffic Safety Act, the new Motor Vehicle Act, it will incorporate the ability to very shortly incorporate these curbside bicycle push buttons to activate the RRFBs. To connect through to the Shubenacadie Canal Greenway in Sullivan's Pond Park, we're proposing a new multi-use pathway be constructed. This area of the park isn't very well utilized right now, other than kind of grass and a desire line from people cutting across. But the routing is a little bit more direct if you're traveling along the Dahlia corridor to Sullivan's Pond path. And it utilizes the grade of the area. So rather than dipping into the bowl and climbing back up, if you follow the internal pathway network right now, it allows you to kind of stay high on the outside of the park and use that momentum to continue going up or coming down. It makes the most sense from a directness and connectivity perspective. Also, the multi-use pathway will be wider, so it'll be 3.5 meters wide, which is a lot more of an accessible width than some of those pathways that already exist in Sullivan's Pond Park. So this will just give people room to pass each other and will be as accessible as possible for moving people walking and cycling through there. Through this design, we've also incorporated the construction of some new sidewalks. There have been gaps in this neighborhood where there's either no sidewalk or sidewalk only on one side of the street. You can see in the orange lines the new sidewalks that will be installed. So the longest one coming has been Oak Street, which I see tons of people walking on. There's a lot of demand. So we will be closing that gap up from Creighton Avenue to Tulip. Also a short section of sidewalk on Creighton Avenue just alongside the park and the apartment building there to get up Dahlia Street. So we'll add that last piece of sidewalk, and then connecting the gap on Victoria Road from Dahlia to Thistle will also be part of this project. So we're looking at kind of the cycling and walking within the entire neighborhood and how we can improve that. So the next steps of this is construction. the first phase of construction, I believe, began last week, and that is focusing on implementing the local street bikeway improvements on Dahlia. So it will be receiving a full sort of road recap with the new asphalt and speed humps and pavement markings and everything associated with that. Also the intersection improvements. So the new RRFBs at Victoria and at Creighton will be installed. The multi-use pathway through Sullivan's Pond Park will be this year. And then we will build the piece of sidewalk on Dahlia and on Creighton. Unfortunately, we're running out of time in the construction season this year, so some of it will be pushed into next year. So we're hoping phase 2 in spring, summer of 2022 will be that piece of sidewalk on Oak Street and the piece of sidewalk on Victoria Street and minor landscaping in Sullivan's Pond Park. So we have some trees planned to be planted around that new multi-use pathway. So that'll likely happen in summer of 2022. A future phase that I've mentioned briefly is pending the legislation changes to the Traffic Safety Act. As soon as those are passed and it is allowed, we have the designs all done up. We will install the curbside mounted posts with the push button so someone on a bicycle can push and activate the flashing beacons and get the priority to ride across those major streets. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Chloe to take you through our next project, Dartmouth North Active Transportation Plan.
Great. Thank you so much, Siobhan. It was great learning a bit more about the Dahlia Oak project for folks, I'm sure. And yeah, the next project that we're going to be addressing, also on the Dartmouth side, is the Dartmouth North Active Transportation Project that just got launched this past spring. So this project is in a much earlier phase than the Dahlia Oak project. The origins of this project are also in the Integrated Mobility Plan. So as you can see up on the upper left-hand corner of the screen, these corridors through North Dartmouth are intended to provide better east-west connections through that neighborhood. And of course, the two Slater Street and Wise Road to provide those north-south connections through Dartmouth as well. So right now, the current conditions in Dartmouth North, a lot of streets and sidewalks are in need of recapitalization. And as Siobhan mentioned earlier in the presentation, a lot of our AAA network is being built as streets are recapitalized. So since Dartmouth North is up for recap in a couple of years, this planning project that we're leading will help ensure that when the streets and sidewalks are recapitalized, that investment is going to make it safer and more convenient for folks who are biking and walking, and it's going to help ensure that that investment better, reflects what the community would like to see, what the people who live there would like to see in terms of meeting their transportation needs. So based on public feedback that we've gathered and will continue to gather, the project goal is to identify street and pathway improvements for walking and biking in Dartmouth North. So some of the recommendations could use similar design solutions to what Siobhan was outlining in terms of better intersection treatments, some new pathways and sidewalks. And the other goal is to design a bicycle route that connects the Burnside Greenway to Wise Road at Albro Lake. So the Burnside Greenway ends at the corner of Lehman and Highfield Park. And that Burnside Greenway provides pedestrian and cycling access all the way from Dartmouth North to Burnside, where a lot of folks work and shop. And this cycling route that we're planning currently is also going to connect down to the Wise Road bicycle lanes. So currently, for anyone who's been traveling around downtown Dartmouth, you know that there's a lot of construction happening. So there's currently bi-directional bike lanes being installed on either side of Wise Road to help provide that north-south connection in Dartmouth. So this project specifically will help to create those east-west connections in Dartmouth. So currently, Dartmouth North has a high density of multi-residential units. So a lot of folks who live in Dartmouth North do live in these kind of complexes. You see on Pinecrest Drive in Lehman, you have a lot of older developments. On Highfield Park Drive, you have a lot kind of newer apartment buildings. There's actually over 5,000 rental units just within that community boundary that we're looking at for this project. And you do see that reflected in some of the census data, which shows that Dartmouth North does have, double the amount of tenants compared to the HRM average. You also see a lot of organizations in Dartmouth North that are working to support families. You see the Dartmouth Islamic Association, the Dartmouth North Community Food Center. So there's a lot of really strong organizations in Dartmouth North as well. So in launching public engagement, it's really important to get a sense of the community that you're working in, who some of the key stakeholders are. So we have a really great team being led by our public engagement specialist, who throughout the summer, throughout July and August, have been working to engage the community through stakeholder interviews. There's a number of community groups in Dartmouth North that we've engaged with, Between the Bridges, the North Grove, the Boys and Girls Club. We also wanted to get a sense of what it's like living there day to day, to get a sense of where the community destinations are, how people are accessing those destinations, if there's barriers to accessing those destinations by foot. So we did lived experience interviews with long-term residents. We also provided opportunities for input at different pop-up booths around Dartmouth North. So we were at the Farrell Hall temporary location of the Dartmouth North Library and also at the North Grove Food Center. And luckily, we were able to partner a little bit with the Ecology Action Center, who had a pop-up bike hub that was running at the Farrell Hall as well through the summer. So we were able to reach out in person to a number of residents in Dartmouth North to get a sense of community destinations and travel patterns. And of course, we had our online and paper surveys around community destinations and barriers to cycling and walking. So the most important thing with community engagement is to get that feedback from folks who live in the area to try to better understand what a cycling route could look like and how that could best connect folks to their destinations. It's also really important when you launch community engagement to just generally let folks know that a planning project is happening, and then also how to engage. So our community engagement specialist worked with a local artist who installed 4 of these art bikes around Dartmouth North. So that was a really fun, creative way to reach pedestrians and folks walking around the community, just to raise awareness that this was happening. It's kind of hard to read, but on that bike, it lists where folks could access the paper surveys and also where they could find the online surveys. And of course, at HRM, we used our different social media channels to let folks know where to access the survey, both online and in person. So based on some initial scoping that we did to try to understand where folks are headed in the community and where some community hubs are, the North Grove Community Food Center in Dartmouth is awesome. It's got a market and a community farm, just to name 2 features. It's really quite an amazing space. There's also the Dartmouth North Library, which is currently under construction, but that's an artist's rendering of what the final space is going to look like. There's also a brand new-ish playground that was finished in 2018. Plus the Dartmouth North Rec Center. And from some preliminary results from phase 1 engagement, we're also understanding that people who live in the area frequently access the shopping area on Wise Road. So there's a Sobeys that's just a little bit south of the project kind of boundary area, plus of course the shopping area near the corner of Wise and Nantucket. There's a number of parks in the area, the Farrell Park, the Brule, Jason McCulloch, Nadia Drive, and a lot of folks accessing Albra Lake as well. And interestingly, from the engagement that we've done so far, given the relative geographic proximity of Dartmouth Crossing and Micmac Mall, it's really hard for folks to access those locations on foot because you do have to pass by or pass through a big highway interchange. So that's really helpful feedback to help the municipality perhaps plan for future projects as well to improve connectivity. So since we've completed phase 1 engagement, right now our fabulous engineers are in the process of designing some route options to then take back to the community for phase 2 engagement to gain feedback. So some key considerations in designing these route options and these design solutions is to make sure that the options that we put forward are informed by public feedback. That will help to build trust with the community, which is very important to make sure that the investment that's being made serves first and foremost the needs of the folks who live there. We're also looking at some public safety concerns. We're working with the Public Safety Office to conduct a women's safety audit to help understand if and where there's some areas where folks might not feel as comfortable walking and cycling, and then looking at some ways that we could potentially address those concerns through street treatments. Also, as any planning project might have, there could be land acquisition issues, some footpaths cross through some of those apartment building developments. Also, there's some pretty steep grades on Pinecrest and Crystal Drive, which will have to be addressed to see whether they qualify for some of these AAA facility treatments. Also, there's very high speed and volumes of traffic on Victoria Road. So some of our options could also look at some traffic calming measures on Victoria Road between Highfield Park and Albro Lake, since that is a residential area, but you have really wide lanes and really high speeds. So that's something that we heard a lot from in our community engagement in terms of a barrier to folks feeling comfortable cycling and walking through the neighborhood. So next steps for Dartmouth North, after we have our design concepts, we're then going to begin round 2 public engagement next month through November, and that's going to be getting feedback on those designs. As Siobhan mentioned as well, the designs also have to be vetted from our internal stakeholders, so our colleagues in traffic and our colleagues at Halifax Water, just to make sure that the routes work well with the public utilities that also intersect the project area. So hopefully we'll have our final route designs, which will be informed by public feedback and also vetted through our internal committees, ready in February of 2022. So that would wrap up our functional plan, as Siobhan mentioned as well. That is the 30% kind of high-level design that our team will be developing. And then through 2022, 2023, we're going to have our preliminary and detailed design where the road engineers are going to take that high-level design and take it down to the inch, around the storm drains and the curbs to make it fit. And then hopefully we'll have construction starting as soon as 2024 in Dartmouth North based on these plans. So that concludes an overview of 2 of the upcoming projects in Dartmouth North, and Dahlia Street. So the other piece that we wanted to focus on today was just some quick tips and tricks for navigating your way through the municipality by bike, especially through the urban core, where there are, a bit more safety concerns. You're sharing the roads with a lot more traffic in densely populated areas. So we wanted to show folks a few tips for how to navigate that through some cycling route planning. So the first map that we're going to show you is the Regional Center AAA status map. So we'll start off with that. And then we're going to show you some cycling features that are on Google Maps. And they were even new to some of us, so we wanted to kind of share those to make sure that, that folks know some of these helpful tools to use. And then finally, we're going to be showing you the Halifax Bike Map, which outlines all the existing facilities. The Halifax Bike Map, we've had paper copies of those circulating at bike shops and different community centers for years and years, and we now have an online version that you can use to help you plan your route. So with that, I'm going to X out of PowerPoint and open up my browser window. So on my screen, you should be able to see the AAA status map. And we call this a status map because it actually shows you the real-time status of the facilities in your community. So you can actually plan long-term route planning to see what might be coming to your community. So here we have preliminary and detailed design, which might mean that a facility is, 3 to 4 years out. If it's under construction, if it's in functional planning. So you can see the Dartmouth North facility in purple is in functional planning. The Dahlia Street here is under construction as of this fall. And if you live in North End Halifax, you can see that there's a lot of new routes that are currently in preliminary and detailed design, which means that construction could begin in a couple of years. Again, we do hear from folks a lot that the cycling infrastructure is kind of piecemeal. You see a little section here and a little section down here. But again, that is because we piggyback onto building our permanent facilities when streets are up for recap. So you can see that down the line, there are quite a few new facilities that are coming. So this is a helpful tool to help you get a sense of what might be coming to your community down the road, so to speak. So the next thing we wanted to show you is on Google Maps, there's actually a few helpful cycling features. So of course, this is a helpful tool that most of us are going to use day to day. I know I certainly use it for driving, walking, biking. So first of all, Google Maps actually has a new biking layer. So when you click the little layers button, you can see that biking is one of the layers. And it's got a legend down here that shows you the trails in dark green. So you can see the Chain of Lakes Trail over near the Fairmount neighborhood, some of the Westmount trails. The dotted lines are what Google Maps labels as bicycle-friendly streets. And then you also have the dedicated lanes as the lighter green lines. So down Windsor Street, you have the dedicated painted lane. Devonshire has some painted lanes as well. So this just kind of, helps you see what some of the facilities are. Very helpful to use. And another feature that it has for cycling is this helpful little elevation map at the bottom. So if you're biking to work, you might say, uh-oh, if I take this route over here, it's going to give me a bit of a hill right in the middle here. So I might be a little sweaty by the time I get to work. So, even if it might take a little bit longer, I might want to choose this route because as you can see from the elevation map, it's a lot smoother and a lot flatter. So that's a helpful tool to use as well when you're planning your route to choose what streets to take. So a nice thing to use alongside the Google Maps cycling features is to use the online version of the Halifax Bike Map. So say that I was traveling from downtown Halifax to the North End. This Halifax Bike Map actually shows you in a bit more detail what some of the existing infrastructure facilities are to take. So if you're, maybe a bit shyer of a biker, you can take multi-use pathways or protected bike lanes, hopefully most of the way, or at least get a sense of where those facilities exist so that even if you do want to plan a little longer of a trip so that you can stay on shared pathways that are removed from the street, or at least go on Hollis and South Park that have those dedicated bike lanes, then you can choose to do so. Or if you're a little bit more intrepid of a biker and are more comfortable with sharing the road with cars, you can look at these suggested bike routes on main roads. So those are all the routes that are outlined in brown. And then we also have the suggested bike routes on local roads. So you see those through Isleville and Fuller here. So this is just a helpful tool, like I said, to use alongside the Google Maps function to help you really choose what facilities you want to cycle on. So with that, Siobhan and I now will be able to discuss some of these issues with you. We have dedicated until 1 p.m. So for the next 10-15 minutes, if anybody would like to ask us any questions about either the Dahlia project, the Dartmouth North project, route planning, or any other active transportation questions in general, we're happy to address those to the best of our ability. So as Siobhan mentioned at the very start of the webinar, you will be able to type your questions in the little question box at the bottom, either using your name or anonymously. And Siobhan, I believe you'll be able to moderate those. So I'll hand it over to Siobhan.
Yes. Thank you, Chloe. And I'm pleased to see a lot of questions coming into the chat box on the side. So we're going to have to try and work through them. I hope that we can answer all of them, but we could get cut off at the end. But we'll go through and see what some of the participants have asked. So there's someone who's reached out saying that they have to leave quite quickly. So we'll answer their question first. They say that they do not own a car, they travel by foot and public transit. Unfortunately, they're a disabled senior and cannot bike, but they support biking. They live on a street slated for bike lanes. If installed, they will eliminate parking on the street. Tradespersons servicing houses on the street already have trouble parking, and some service people have refused to ply their trade in their neighborhood due to this problem. We cannot ask these service providers to park half a kilometer away when they have equipment and ladders to carry. Bike lanes will only make this situation worse. So yes, I appreciate that perspective for sure. To answer your question, this is something that is factored into the planning of the bicycle facilities. Kind of parking and loading concerns are factored in and traded off with some of the other needs on the street for safe walking and cycling facilities, for driving lanes. So I appreciate that perspective and the need to have service people come into your house. And I'm not sure exactly which street you're referring to, so it's hard to comment directly on that. But ensuring that people can use and access their homes in the way that they need to is a factor when we're looking at the appropriate cycling facilities to plan on a road. So thank you for writing in on that. We have, I am going to publish that question and go back to the top. Okay. So this first question that came in says, I already commute by bike for all health, environmental, and financial benefits identified. I'm sold, great. But I know lots of people that want to bike, but the lack of safe, protected bike lanes is a major disincentive. Local street bikeways are not cutting it. Still too many drivers going too fast, ignoring signs, and making it feel unsafe. Why is the minimum grade taking so long to build? Okay, so first I will talk about local street bikeways. It is a newer facility type to Halifax, where we just have the Vernon Street and the Allen Street sections built so far. It's been a learning process, and we are monitoring as we go and realizing that in some areas additional infrastructure measures need to be incorporated. So it's a bit of an iterative approach to get those to where they need to be for the safe lane sharing vehicle volume and speed threshold. So we're kind of working to improve what we have now, and our designs, for example, for the Dahlia Street local street bikeway corridor will incorporate some of those lessons learned. So we'll hopefully improve those to get them into that area where you feel like they're more comfortable for all ages and abilities. Our target is kind of a 30 kilometer per hour, 1,000 vehicles or less per day threshold. So we're trying to get there. The question, why is the minimum grid taking so long to build? I believe in the integrated mobility plan, the original timeline requested for that is 2022, and we are working towards building it as fast as possible. I think it does come down to internal staff capacity and kind of coordination of there's quite large projects that you need to coordinate, sort of utility replacement, and it's not just the walking and cycling facilities, it's the whole road and curbs that need to be recapitalized. So making sure that there's budget in each year to be able to accomplish that all at one time has been a factor that's maybe taken things a little bit longer. And we are working towards building it as quickly as possible. A lot of the network, as you saw on our maps, already has functional plans either underway or approved. I feel like we've got some stuff that's shovel ready. We're just trying to kind of balance that last detail design phase and the ability to have that construction budget ready to go with the coordination of kind of complicated transportation and utility things that have held it up a little bit more than anticipated. I hope that that answers your question. I'm going to publish that. All right. The next one. Curious about the city's relationship to the Halifax Urban Greenway idea, running along the rail cut on the southwest side of the peninsula. So we do have the Halifax Urban Greenway in our active transportation priorities plan map, and there has been a phase 2 functional plan of the Halifax Urban Greenway. For those on the call who might not be familiar, it exists right now on Beaufort Avenue from the end of Beaufort up to South Street. And this next phase includes connection over to Point Pleasant Park and as far up north as far as Jubilee Road. So we have functional plans for that, and we're just working on the detailed design to build out that connection. It would be a multi-use pathway, and we are working with the Halifax Urban Greenway Association, a community group that had originally conceptualized that. Unfortunately, it's not going to be located along the top of the CN rail cut. There were some safety concerns associated with that, but we have an alternative plan that uses parks in the HRM right-of-way to get it connected. So we'll continue working to build that. I think that I accidentally published a question. Let's see. Can you speak to what maintenance levels users can expect on bike routes, particularly as we go into the fall and winter months? I've been frustrated by hazards and obstructions caused by lack of street cleaning and timely snow clearing. It would be great to ensure that these routes are prioritized from a safety and equity perspective. And to that comment, I totally agree. It has been a learning process when we have built our protected bikeways on South Park Street and on Hollis, how our maintenance equipment and snow clearing vehicles can get in there and clear it to an adequate standard quickly. And I know that there has been conversations lately about how we can ensure that that's happening in a timely manner. I believe that the classification of street is associated with the timelines for having those bikeways cleared, but I agree that it should be maintained as quickly as the streets to facilitate people moving around by bicycle and by vehicle and the sidewalks. But yeah, we're improving in that sense. Thank you for that question. Let us see. Someone has written in, the Halifax bike counters are on fire right now. Record-breaking numbers of people are cycling. There is clearly demand, but this is not matched by the infrastructure we have. Other cities have taken far bolder action than Halifax. What is stopping us from doing more pop-up bike lanes like the slow streets of last year? So that's a very good point. We do have 5 permanent bicycle counters that have been getting kind of annual high counts in these past few days. People are out there cycling, and I agree that we need to be kind of building the infrastructure to reflect this. In terms of the pop-up bike lanes and slow streets, we've transitioned that program that was very temporary with the construction pylons and the signage, and we've transitioned that into more of the temporary style, tactical style of bikeway, with things like paint and bollards and curbs that are going to be pinned into the asphalt. So we will have sort of like a higher quality slow street that can be achieved in the shorter term, but it was just a little bit too much for this year to get all of that designed and in place. But the plan is to have it hopefully go in next year with a treatment that people can't just move around the pylons if they wish. It'll provide a higher quality experience on those slow streets towards achieving the AAA network a little bit faster in the interim. Thank you for that. Let's see here. Are cyclists required by law to dismount? Are cyclists required by law to dismount and cross at marked or unmarked crosswalks in Halifax? So I believe where we have marked cross rides on the street, you can ride on your bicycle across. But in a crosswalk that isn't necessarily a cross ride, I believe that it's an issue with the bicycle not having the right of way as they get across there. I am going to need to follow up with you about that, where it is kind of a legal question. I don't want to mislead. So if you're able to drop the best way to contact you, whether it's a phone number or an email address, into the chat, I can confirm that with you after the fact. I'm going to get some advice on that. Okay, so we have a question here. I cycle on Wise Road daily from the bridge to north, and I'm quite confused by the current road markings. Are the markings there temporary until everything is completed? Question. Nothing specifies a pathway for cycling, but it doesn't look like it is for walking. Could you clarify, please? So Chloe, I don't know if you want to have a stab at this one where it's near your Dartmouth North project. I know that it's a construction zone right now, but can you comment on that?
Okay, thanks, Siobhan. So the current markings that are on Wise Road would be temporary because they're in the midst of construction right now. So I absolutely empathize with folks who are cycling on Wise right now through what's really a construction zone, that it is very challenging. The end goal for the construction, which is slated to be wrapped up at the end of next month, is going to be those bi-directional bike lanes on either side of the road. For the current markings that would be on there, those would be temporary to attempt to guide cyclists through the area, but I do keep an eye on the construction because it will be accelerating and wrapping up hopefully by the end of next month, concluding at that corner of Wise and Albro.
Perfect. Thank you, Chloe. I've got another one for you here. What educational or informational campaigns will be targeted at drivers? Le Dutch, I'm not sure what that means. Could be someone's name. Oh, the Dutch Reach. There we go. Pardon me. The Dutch Reach to avoid dooring, promoting that sort of education. Would also love no more bike lanes in the door zone, 1 meter passing, awareness of bike boxes. Okay, those are some examples of the things that we would promote through education. Do you want to have a crack at that?
Sure, thanks, Siobhan. So we're certainly this year working on a bit of a strategy when it comes to education and outreach, looking at not only the facilities that myself and Siobhan and our fellow planners are planning, but then how can we better educate not just the cyclists on how to use the facilities, but also the drivers on how to use the facilities. So we've had some very interesting suggestions put forward to us about perhaps incorporating some of these lessons, such as the one about dooring, as they call it, and being careful as a driver and being aware of cyclists, taking some of those messages and actually partnering with the driving schools and putting that into your lesson so that when you receive your license as a driver, you're going to have that information covered. And that would be a way to ensure that every driver is accessing that information. Otherwise, we're relying on the typical means of disseminating information through our internet channels, through our website. So we are exploring ways that we can create partnerships to better get those messages out there, because I hear you, it is scary as a cyclist going through a bike lane. Even if it's protected, you're not necessarily protected from car doors when you do have smaller distances, because there's only so much space on the road. You can't, unless you're going to get into the sidewalks and issues with the old trees that are there. So we do have to figure out ways to share the space that we do have on the road in a safe way. So yeah, if anyone has any creative ideas about how to reach drivers, please do drop Siobhan and I a line. Our email addresses are there on the screen as well.
Perfect. I am conscious that we've reached the end of our time at 1 p.m. I see that there's still quite a few questions that are left in the queue. If you would like to, you could drop your the best way to contact you, and we'll follow up with the questions. If not, you can give a call into 311 and we will be sure to follow up with you that way. I apologize. I wasn't expecting such a super chatty group, and they're all very good questions that we would like to answer, but we're at the end of our time today. We really appreciate you coming out to our lunchtime webinar. Hope you learned some things about our upcoming projects and ways to plan your bicycle commuting routes, and we hope to see you out there on the roads. Safe cycling.